Hello, how you all doing? I wanted to talk very briefly about this thing that's called imposter syndrome. Uh, you may be aware of it, you may not be aware of it. You've probably experienced it many times in your life. Essentially it's a thing that happens very often to musicians, artists who become part of academia, and there can be a feeling that you're in the wrong place, that you don't know enough about theory, you haven't read widely enough to understand all the different arguments, and it's a genuine thing. What I'd like to say about it in relation to music and philosophy is that the same thing happens to academics as well when they're faced with musicians or artists in their environment, in their academic environment. So essentially we're talking about hierarchies here. So you'll get, for sake of an example, you'll get a jazz musician suddenly thrust into the world of jazz research in academia, and they will have the knowledge of being a jazz musician and everything that they bring to the table in that respect. But then when the Q&A session happens, that kind of time, they'll feel that they don't know how to speak with their own voice, because they'll say certain things and then somebody else in the room will say, well, hang on a minute, have you read this? Have you read that? Have you checked this out? Have you checked that out? And they'll feel an imposter in that environment. But what's worth bearing in mind, and I'm speaking immediately to the jazz musicians right now watching this, what's worth bearing in mind that those academics that bring that suggestion to the party, they don't know what you know. So they might be a doctor, they might be a professor, they might be a very well respected individual, in terms of the hierarchy system of academia or research, but they don't actually know what you know. And part of their response to your knowledge is to try and regain some territory of their own. There's a term that gets used quite widely. It always makes me laugh. It's called territorial pissing. And it's this animalistic instinct to demarcate boundaries. Now, what's beautiful about what gets called practice research these days, in the other days it was called practice as research, then there was practice-based research, etc., etc. These days it's called practice research. On the continent, in Europe, it's called artistic research. What's interesting these days is that there's this opportunity to have these conversations, these dialogues between different fields. And the important thing that comes out of that is this resonance between different modes of thinking, different modes, different theories. And that's the good ground. That's what we're supposed to be doing, and that's what universities always say that they are open to doing. But then when the hierarchies come into place, you can find yourself in a situation where, depending on the context, depending on the content of people in the room, you can find yourself the odd man out, or the odd person out, or the last man standing, or whatever, however you want to frame it. I would also say to musicians at this point, don't be anti-theory. You have got a body of knowledge in your work. When you encounter theory, don't shy away from it, because it's all about the resonance. And when you read those texts, when you hear about those theories and those concepts, bear in mind, remember that you were not a nobody, you were not, completely devoid of knowledge. When you engage with those texts, remember that you have a voice and that you have a body of knowledge that you can bring to bear on those things. And the resonance between the two will actually make it better for both parties. So don't be intimidated, stick up for yourself, enjoy the encounter between practice and research, enjoy the whole concept of blending practice and research, and remember that when you put your saxophone in your mouth, when you sit at the piano, when you play bass, when you play drums, whatever it is that you do, when you dance or you make theatre or film or painting, you are dealing with non-discursive knowledge at that point. When you open your mouth or when you write and you engage in discourse, that level of discourse, or that mode of discourse I should say, not to make it a hierarchical thing, it's important to blend the two. It's always important to blend the two. Make somebody listen to your music while they're reading about your music. And if they don't want to do it, they're not ready for this brave new world that is emerging in practice research. And if they're not prepared to do it, don't be afraid to tell them that that's what they should do. Whether it be in the form of listening to audio or a live performance or notation on the screen or whatever it is. Stand your ground. Don't fall foul of the imposter syndrome trap. Don't fall foul of the territorial pissing. Terrible performance. Stand your ground and make your case, and we'll all move forward into a better world of research by dint of that level of commitment. Take care. I'll speak to you all soon.